What kind of proactive measures do you use to minimise behaviours?
I think then by reducing the anxiety around the participants, we then start working on the anxiety with our participants, and that reduces the behaviour. But I don't think there's a direct way of reducing behaviours.
Yeah.
If, for example, there are aggressive behaviours, then we try to find ways to keep the staff safe. That'd be the first. That is obviously an environmental thing as well, because if you have houses that have more room, then it's easier for staff to maintain safe. I call the environment part of our team, because we have to control the environment like it's a staff member, and that way we can manage the behaviours better. But that's not always possible in the NDIS, because some of these environments and a lot of the housing don't really support those kind of interventions.
Every SIL provider knows the challenges: compliance, rosters, claims. But what if you could work smarter, grow faster, and make a bigger impact? Welcome to SILosophy, where we have real conversations about what it takes to succeed in supported independent living. This podcast is powered by Tania Gomez Consulting and Resolve. Let's get into it.
Welcome to SILosophy. Today I'm joined by Ollie Vles, and we're going to be talking about supporting challenging participants in a SIL environment. But before we get into it, welcome Ollie, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Tania. Yeah.
It's so great to have you here, and you've been a client of mine for quite some time, and I'm always amazed at how you so effortlessly manage very complex behaviours in a SIL or a supported accommodation environment. Before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about your story of how you got into this and a little bit about Strength in Care?
Yeah, so I'm the founder and CEO of Strength in Care. Started at the start of COVID, really, when I found this niche working with children with autism, really, and disabilities that had severe behaviours at home and that couldn't be supported in the community anymore. And that's kind of where it started. And from there, it evolved into what it is now.
And tell us a little bit about your model. Who do you work with? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for a few of my clients, a lot of children, a lot of young people. As we know, SIL is not for under 18s. So I provide full-time care for some under 18s that is then funded by state government, or at least a rent and boarding, lodging kind of arrangements. But it feels like SIL in a lot of ways, and we try to run it as a SIL in the sense of the NDIS and compliance and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. What are some of the most common challenges that you have when working with complex needs?
There's a few. I think the main thing is that the complex needs, they're very personal, and they're very personalized problems. So it's hard to come up with a cookie cutter kind of solution that will work for a lot of people, because these behaviours have different causes, different ways of coming out. But the biggest challenges we see, for example, are that robust housing is not robust enough for a lot of our clients, that robust housing is not built to what some of our clients need, that then brings in, challenges with finding housing, massive property damage bills, those kind of things are probably our biggest challenge, because environment is our biggest team member, I always say. So there's I call the environment part of our team, because we have to control the environment like it's a staff member, and that way we can manage the behaviours better. But that's not always possible in the NDIS, because the funding limits how you can control the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of proactive measures do you use to minimise behaviours? So you talked about the environment. Is that the main measure you use to try and minimise or reduce complex behaviours?
I mean, I don't think we'd necessarily try to reduce the behaviour at first. I think if the first thing is to, if for example, there are aggressive behaviours, then we try to find ways to keep the staff safe would be the first. That is obviously an environmental thing as well, because if you have houses that have more room, then it's easier for staff to maintain safe. If you've got a room to put a big dining table on the floor and bolt that to the floor, then that gives a natural barrier for staff to use in those instances. But again, that's very limited, and some of these environments and a lot of the housing don't really support those kind of interventions. Another one would be utilizing like play equipment outside to keep staff safe, so that we, staff have ways to manage those behaviors and feel safe when those behaviors escalate.
Yeah.
And I think then by reducing the anxiety around the participants, we then start working on the anxiety with our participants, and that reduces the behavior. But I don't think there's a direct way of reducing behaviors.
Yeah.
So.
Staffing is really important to delivering supports. You can't do it without it, right? And I know staffing is something that's a challenge, but you seem to have a bit of a unique model, or you seem to have the staffing side relatively under control. What kind of staff do you look for, and how do you know, how can you spot, or how do you vet the right kind of staff to support challenging clients?
I guess it starts straight away in the first call, or, like this is what we do. And just telling people, look, you might be working with clients that are aggressive, that verbally abuse people, that, do these kind of things. And if you're not comfortable with that, then maybe this is not the right company for you. That's usually how I start the first interview, because that's what we do, and I need people that understand that. And then secondarily, I'm a support worker, and I always say I identify as a support worker, even though I'm the CEO. And I'm protective of my support workers. I'm protective of their work rights, of their work environment, of the standards, and we'll fight for what they need. And in turn, that helps participants, because long-term support staff is the number one thing in behaviours of concern that will reduce it. I don't think anybody can deny that. People are the main thing in that.
So how do you find support staff?
I've got a bit of a different approach, I guess. A lot through word of mouth. We pay the right support staff well, so I think a lot of my staff know that when they came in, they were put on a certain level, but then when time progressed, they got a few raises here and there, because I do value the staff, and if they show that they can work with certain clients and at a certain level, then I will reflect that in their pays as much as I can. So I try to show them, obviously, like financially, but also just by being there and supporting them, and trying to and make them feel comfortable working with the participants, and knowing what it's like to work with those kind of participants myself. I know that it can be very taxing, and mentally and physically, and it's
How important do you think is communication between the staff and the participants, as far as when it comes to challenging behaviour, and how do you manage the communication piece?
That again depends. I think there's so many ways that you can communicate with clients, but again, the main that I have seen is what I call the telepathy, kind of like, especially if you're working with non-verbal clients, which we have a few of. You see that staff come in new, they're not really sure, the client not really sure, they kind of, there might be a few incidents, but then over time, you start to learn how to read clients. I mean, some of my clients, I can walk in and I'll know straight away if they're okay or something's not right.
Yeah.
And then by just asking them a few questions, I can usually already ascertain if he's in pain, or, you can kind of just fight your way around that, but just by looking at them. And I can't really explain that, or, I can't teach it to people, because that's just knowing people. That's just, getting to know people, and that's that again, that's that relationship, and that's why it's so important that staff are long-term
Yeah.
committed. I think that's where it lacks a little bit in NDIS to acknowledge that that is a really important part of what the NDIS should be thriving to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Can you share a success story about some of your challenging participants or a challenging situation with a participant, and what happened and what you have learnt from that?
I guess I've been through a lot of challenges over the time, and they continue all the time. What I've learned is that you definitely have to fight. You cannot just let it go and sit back and hope for the best. That's one of the things I've learned, that if you want something to happen, that you have to, put some energy in. And
Is that fighting support coordinators or the commission, or is it everybody?
it depends on the situation. At the moment, I'm fighting a support coordinator, and I've fought the NDS Commission in the past. I won't say fought, but had my discussions with them around certain things, and I think that's good. And it's always come out all right, and I think in the end, people understand that what I do, I do it from passion, and I do it with the client, participants best. Like, that's always the main goal. But at the same time, I'm also a business, and I've got I've got staff to think about, and obviously a business, and you try to keep all those things in mind, and try to make the best decisions for the business and the participant.
Yeah. And you touched on previously some of the challenges with complex behaviours. You talked about property damage, you talked about aggressive behaviour, you talked about managing the environment. What's your best tips for a new SIL provider in managing these challenges?
Yeah, again, I guess, and this is where I've in the past had issues with people in the NDIS, and is like, it's a lack of better term, I call it, making their world smaller. Because if you've got a lot of behaviours, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress happening. So by then, obviously taking him out of a really wild, busy environment and putting him into a calmer environment with a lot less triggers in that sense, that would be my first choice. For example, a client that he can't stand sliding doors. So we had a few different SDA robust houses, but they all have sliding doors. So every sliding door, that just became where it started off with a little bit of sliding, and then it would get into banging, and then it would just be completely breaking the sliding door. And that would go in a range of like maybe a week or 2 weeks, and then in a day sometimes. And trying to get the sliding door replaced is not possible. Getting the property damage refunded seems to be not really possible either. So then where does that leave a client that obviously has an issue with a sliding door, and all the houses that are being built have sliding doors? And then I know that there is families that are doing everything in their power to, build a house for their son, daughter, to their standard, and having trouble with banks getting it approved because it's not according to SDA standards, or even though it is up to those standards for to get the funding, but it's just not up to the standard builds that are getting built. It's. I think that for some clients, for example, low windows are not good. That causes a lot of anxiety. I can see in some of my clients that they just want those windows gone. And then we board them up, and then they have no light in the house, where, maybe we can build houses for these clients where we have lights that are, or windows that are higher up in the, so that they don't feel like they're right there in their eyesight, but we still get daylight in. And it's kind of those kind of little things that I think can be personalised a bit more. And hopefully that will change. I mean, NDIS is still pretty new in that sense.
Yeah, I know previously you've had quite a lot of broken windows and things like that, and you've had issues with boarding them up and trying to manage that. How do you manage the damage to property?
This is very hard. I've got a client, and the father is a builder. So that's how we manage it, Like
You just fix it.
You just like, we just board over boards, or we just board up walls, like you just try to keep it safe. But at the same time, we are currently actively looking for a house that's going to be demolished for a client of mine, because we know that in any other house he's going to do that much property damage, or we have to do that many modifications to make it safe for him, that we're probably better off just getting a house that's going to be demolished.
Right.
And then going into that for a few months until hopefully his personalised SDA will be built.
Yeah, right. So it's being creative, thinking outside the box.
Yeah, and then again, it's costing a lot of money. So, and it comes back on families and on providers.
Do you wear a lot of the costs for property damage out of your pocket?
Indirectly, yes. Yeah, I mean, all the time. It's for the younger cohort that we have that are funded by state government. There are some provisions in place for property damage. They are very intensive in the sense that it costs a lot of time to put these claims in, and it then takes a lot of time to get paid. So they are expensive in the sense of back of office kind of systems, but we do get that back. But for clients over 18, I don't know if you know, but I don't think there is any provision for property damage whatsoever. So,
do you get it back through your insurances at all?
No, it is actually a thing in my insurance that states that they won't pay for that.
Yeah, right. So you just have to wear those costs.
Yeah. And then NDIS saying, your insurance should pay for that. That is very easy to say, but that there's no insurance that will cover that.
Yeah.
So that's like saying, like, you can have a drunk driver drive your car. You just need to find an insurer. Like, nobody's going to do that. So that's the yeah.
One of the challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about where Strength in Care is today and what your goals are for the future.
So we are like very boutique, small operator because we've got a very small amount of clients. We obviously do a lot more hours with those clients than the average NDIS participant, but I guess we're a little bit different from a lot of NDIS providers that have 100 participants and probably do the same amount of hours that we do, and we barely have 10. So, so that's a bit different. So we're obviously a lot more intensive. We have a lot of involvement in the teams, the building of the teams, the allied health around the participants. Trying to be really involved with that because a big part of these participants' lives.
Yeah, wonderful. So we've talked quite a lot today about challenging behaviours. We've talked about understanding the challenges, proactive strategies, tools for communication, how you support staff through challenging participants, and some of your success stories. Is there anything else that you think a new provider or any provider looking at SIL should think about when it comes to the intake or the supporting a participant with complex behaviours?
Yeah, just know what you started. I mean, I think you need a bit of passion and know what you're getting into, and I always do. And when we get into, when we take on a participant, we take them on. We're not going to give up after a few incidents and stuff. Well, we know it's not going to be easy, and then we're in it for the long run, and that's how we try to operate. And it's usually rocky and hard at the start. Trying to build teams around these kind of participants is not easy. You have a lot of staff that will come in and then leave maybe a couple of months later because it's too hard, or there's an easier client that they might have picked up, or there's so many reasons for staff, again, not to want to work with clients like this as well. So that makes it hard to create these teams around them. And then once you do, then you start getting into the good side of things where you can see the strategies implemented working. You can see that then the staff actually start feeling that it's working. Then it's easier for allied health to put in new strategies because the staff see that it works, and then everything instead of being in a vicious cycle, you're getting into this positive cycle and everything starts going better. So
I often hear that about accommodation services, whether it's SIL or the services you do for younger children, that if you can do accommodation well in disability, you can make such an impact. And then also if you don't do it well, you can make such a negative impact. Is that one of the reasons that you decided specifically to work with complex children?
I guess it's my background as well. Like I started off in this sector working in secure welfare and with child protection, with some really, like probably the worst children in the state at that particular time in secure welfare, like with mental health and children that not necessarily because of criminal behaviour, but because of mental health and disability can't be out in the street for a period of time. And you working with them, you start seeing kind of these patterns and you think, I can help here. I can actually, maybe do some good. And it's these little wins that you can have with those kind of kids that are the big wins, because it's those little seeds for later in life. And I think that started me off in disability because if you would have asked me 10, 15 years ago if I ever worked in disability, I probably would have said no. But then when I started working with non-verbal autistic kids, I actually realised real quick that they're not that different, and that a lot of it is the same, and it's that trauma-informed approach, crisis intervention, and the therapeutic interventions are all the same in how you work with them. So that was quite easy for me to adapt, and
Talking about training, my last question for you is, what training do you provide for your staff to make sure that they're well equipped to support complex participants?
Yeah, I would like a little bit more help from the NDIS. I do a lot of, we do like crisis intervention, therapeutic intervention, ethical response, like any of those kind of trainings I think are really important if you work in especially aggressive clients. I think that staff need to be confident, understand how to position themselves, understand how to protect themselves, understand what they can and can't do in those situations. That training is really important, but again, not funded by the NDIS. We try to provide those trainings to our staff, but it kind of depends. If we have like obviously a client with a new team, and it's a big team, then we can usually provide those trainings. But if it's one or two staff members with a new client that doesn't have those amount of hours, it becomes very hard to provide those individualized trainings. So then try to do it differently. But again, I advocated it in NDIS a lot because we have the online training platforms and they, I guess, tick the boxes from an quality thing. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I don't think they teach staff to be confident and exert confidence in those moments when a participant really needs the staff to be confident and show that they can keep a participant safe, and that makes a difference.
Yeah, that's great. I know that I said the last question was the last question, but tell me about, obviously with complex behaviours comes paperwork around reportable incidents, implementing restrictive practices, implementing unauthorised restrictive practices. What's your best tip to manage that well? Because you had a few.
Don't get angry is probably my best tip. I don't know. It's a very frustrating, as you know, it's a frustrating side of things for me. I find it frustrating that, in NEAs, the difference between providing really low-level care and these really complex participants, the difference in what they pay providers is minimal, and the amount of work is, like astronomical compared between the two. For example, if a behaviour support plan is laid for a client that has, 4, 5, 6 restrictive practices, that it creates so much work for an organisation like ours, especially because we're small and we don't have dedicated people that can just do NDIS portal inputs every day. So it just takes us away from actually doing, work on the floor and those kind of things. And it's frustrating at times.
But you do have an amazing compliance person. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about Beck.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't do it without her, and I don't think she could do it without you. So that's
work together.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. That was awesome.
oh, great. Thanks.
We're going to do a second one.
That's a wrap on this episode of SILosophy. If this resonated with you, take a second to subscribe and share it with someone in the SIL space who really needs to hear this. Don't forget to connect with Tania Gomez Consulting on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook for more resources, conversations, and support to help you grow your impact. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep making a difference.